Hello, my name is Raul Grieben and I'm a PhD student at the Institute for Neural Computation of the Ruhr University Bochum. Today, I'm going to present you a case study on how a DFT model that operates on real sensory input can be used to fit behavioral data. I will explain how experimental effects emerge from the underlying time-continuous neural dynamics. Most DFT models of higher cognition share two core subnetworks that are crucial for object-oriented interaction with the environment. The first is the visual search subnetwork that consists of a feed-forward feature extraction path and a top-down guidance path. The second is the scene memory subnetwork that autonomously builds working memory feature representations of previously attended objects. In this case study, I'm going to present a neural dynamic architecture that builds on these two core subnetworks to account for the difference between feature and conjunctive search. In this context, I will address the question of whether both the overall speed and efficiency of conjunctive visual search can be improved by scene memory. In the classical view of N-Treisman, visual search was either parallel or serial. Jeremy Wolff, on the other hand, described the efficiency of visual search as forming a continuum. He defined the slope of the reaction time against set size function as the measure of efficiency. By this measure, single feature search is efficient as the reaction times are independent of set size. The target pops out. In the conjunctive condition, on the other hand, reaction times are proportional to the number of distractor items. Conjunctive search is, therefore, considered inefficient. The role of memory in visual search has been intensely studied in a variety of experimental paradigms. A prominent paradigm is the preview paradigm. Using this paradigm in a naturalistic setting, Hollingworth found benefits of scene preview. Hillstrom and colleagues extended this work by showing that information on the gist of scene can improve search efficiency. These effects were not found for randomly ordered search arrays, indicating that it is specific to naturalistic scenes. A common finding in the preview paradigm is that mean reaction times are reduced if a preview of the search array is provided. Becker and Paschler argued that this provides strong evidence for guidance of attention by visual working memory. In their experiments, efficiency was not increased by preview, however. Both experiments and model simulations are based on a scenario in which participants explore a visual scene, acute at some point to a visual search task by a sample target object that appears in the visual array, and then respond by indicating the location of a matching visual object. We choose the scene preview paradigm as a key behavioral task to address with the DFT model. We specifically address the question why preview benefits observed for natural scenes did not generalize to randomly arranged search arrays. In the experiment, the task was to locate an object in the visual array that exactly matches a visual cue presented in the same array. The visual array and cue set up a single feature search in condition 1 and a two feature conjunction search in condition 2 and 3. In condition 2, the search array appeared 800 milliseconds before the onset of the visual cue, whereas it appeared at the same time as the cue in condition 1 and 3. Condition 1 and 3 replicated the reaction time pattern of efficient single feature search and inefficient conjunctive search. Search in the preview condition 2 was slightly more efficient than in condition 3. This is the first experimental observation that both the overall speed and efficiency of conjunctive visual search can be improved by scene memory. For a more in-depth analysis of this effect and a discussion of why it was not previously found, I would like to refer you to the Grieben et al. Paper. That paper also contains a follow-up experiment that illustrates the fragility of this effect, a fragility explained by the model. I will now take you through the model and will then return to comparing these experimental results to modeling results. The model captures three fundamental processes of visual cognition. First, exploring the visual array through sequences of attention selection decisions and at each attended location, committing the perceived feature values to scene memory. Second, shifting attention to locations at which visual transients are detected and committing feature information from those locations to a working memory of the feature cue of visual search. Third, visually searching for locations in the visual array at which the cued feature conjunctions are seen. This figure provides an overview of the neural dynamic architecture that generates these processes. The boxes represent subnetworks of neural dynamic fields whose coupling is outlined by arrows. The entire neural architecture is essentially one large but structured system of integral differential equations. Their solutions evolve continuously in time, while live visual scene input is given from a camera. Sequences of internally generated instabilities lead to transitions that demarcate different processing steps. In that sense, all neural processing is entirely autonomous, not driven by any algorithm or procedure. I will first outline the structure and function of three subsystems that play an important role in all three tasks. Then I will step through the three tasks of visual cognition and describe the subnetworks that bring about the required neural processes. Visual cognition builds on visual input from which features are extracted. Visual input might take the form of a video stream from live camera input or from sequences of synthetic images. Three simple features are used in the model: color, orientation, and size. Color is extracted by transforming RGB values into hue space. Saturation is passed through a threshold function and four elongated center surround filters to extract orientation. Size is extracted as a combination of width and length using a pyramid of center surround filters of increasing size with a one-way inhibition along the scale dimension. The normalized output of the feature extraction pathway provides input into three space feature fields, with each combined two dimensions of visual space with one feature dimension. Each of the three scene space feature maps projects to the scene spatial salient field. These projections marginalize the feature dimension, so they are purely spatial. Visual cognition always entails attentional selection decisions. This is a subsystem of the neural dynamic architecture that generates such selection decisions. Central is a scene spacer selection field, which represents the current location of spatial attention. This field is in the dynamic regime of selection, so that it can support only a single subthreshold peak at any point in time. It receives multimodal input from the salient field and selects the most salient location. That selection is biased by three additional sources of input. First, it is biased away from previously attended locations by inhibitory input from the inhibition of return memory trace that reflect the recent history of activation of the scene spacer selection field. Second, it is biased away from locations that receive inhibitory input from the spatial working memory field. Sustained peaks in that field are destabilized, however, whenever movement is detected in the scene. This happens through a two-layer offset detector that generates a transient activation peak whenever salient inputs move or vanish. The number of peaks that can be simultaneously sustained in the spatial working memory field is limited by accumulating inhibition from these peaks. The exact number that reflects the capacity of working memory depends on the balance of neural inhibition and excitation in this field and provides an important constraint for fitting the experimental results. Third, attention is attracted to locations at which rapid changes of spatial salience occur. This bias arises due to input from an onset detector, a two-layer neural dynamic field that generates a transient activation peak in response to shifts of input. Spatial attention, represented by a self-stabilized peak in the scene spacer selection field, plays a critical role in feature binding. Feature binding occurs in the model in a manner that could be viewed as a neural implementation of Treisman's feature integration theory. In the feature detection subnetwork, multi-dimensional feature values from two different sources are compared in parallel along each feature dimension. The mismatch detection field receives excitatory input from the attended feature field and inhibitory input from the expected feature field. A peak in the mismatch detection field is only formed, therefore, when the locations of peaks in the two source fields differ sufficiently. A no-match response is signaled if the attended, the expected, and the mismatch detection fields all carry a peak. A match response is signaled if both the attended and expected field carry peaks, but the mismatch detection field does not. A single mismatch for one feature dimension is sufficient to activate the condition of dissatisfaction. The condition of satisfaction is activated only when a match is detected along each of the specified dimensions. The default behavior of the architecture is the autonomous visual exploration of the scene. In visual exploration, salient locations in the visual array are sequentially selected into the attentional foreground, and features at these locations are transferred to working memory. This is a subnetwork responsible for visual exploration and memory formation. This subnetwork becomes active when the Explore task node boosts the scene spacer selection field and the memory space feature selection fields, enabling these to generate peaks. The scene spacer selection field forms a peak at a single location that is favored by its input. The attended location provides a cylinder-shaped input to a set of three-dimensional scene spacer feature selection fields, which have the same structure as the scene space feature maps described earlier. Peaks form where input from the scene space feature maps overlaps with the spatially localized cylinders, representing the space feature values of the attended objects. Feature information is extracted by integrating across space and feeding that sum as slice input into the corresponding space feature map in another set of such three-dimensional fields, the scene memory, which is operated in the dynamic regime of sustained activation. In these memory fields, peaks form again where these slices overlap with cylinder input from the scene spacer selection field. These peaks are added to the scene working memory. The number of peaks that can be simultaneously sustained in the memory space feature maps is limited by the accumulation of inhibition as additional peaks arise. The capacity limit depends on the balance of neural excitation and inhibition in these fields, and, as was the case for the spatial working memory, is a key factor for fitting the experimental results. The memory space feature maps provide three-dimensional input to an analogous set of three memory space feature selection fields. In these fields, one item from the input is selected and brought above threshold, again based on overlap with cylinder input from the scene spacer selection field. The result is an isolated representation of the memory item at attended location. Projection from both this representation and the scene space feature selection field converge onto a neural feature matching mechanism which detects whether the attended item's features have been successfully committed to scene working memory. When this detection occurs, the task node is deactivated through an inhibitory connection. This concludes one step in the exploration sequence. By default, that is, unless another task becomes active, the task node is then reactivated, thus initiating another cycle of attentional selection and commitment to working memory. This is a subnetwork that is responsible for retaining a feature queue for visual search. It is activated by the retain task node, which may itself be activated from different sources depending on the cognitive task at hand. In the current context, the task node is activated by the onset detector when the system detects a change in the visual scene. The retain process consists of storing currently attended feature values as self-sustained peaks in the search queue fields. These are one-dimensional, since only the feature values of the queue, not its locations, are relevant. To forward feature values from the scene space feature selection field to the search queue field, the retain node homogeneously boosts the activation in the retain gate fields, enabling them to build peaks and thus to pass on activation. The retain subtask is terminated once the content of the search queue field matches the feature of the currently attended item. Upon the activation of the retain node, peaks in the attention field and the gating field decay, whereas in the search queue field the queue's feature values are retained for later use. The search task node drives a subnetwork which increases the likelihood that attention will be focused on a location where all features of the search queue are present. This is primarily achieved through top-down guidance from two sources, the visual scene itself and scene memory. Each of these components include three-dimensional space feature overlap fields which combine sub-threshold input from the scene maps or the memory maps with feature input from the search queue. Super-threshold peaks emerge at locations where there is overlap between the queued feature values and the scene or memory. These peaks are projected into two-dimensional spatial guidance fields which bias attention selection in the scene spatial selection field. Importantly, the resting level of the scene spatial guidance field is downregulated dynamically via an inhibitory connectivity from each search queue field. The resting level thus depends on the number of queued features, decreasing as more search queue fields contain peaks. The strength of the inhibitory connections is such that when only one feature is queued, it suffices for items to share only that queue feature in order to create peaks in the scene spatial guidance fields. When more than one feature are queued, peaks emerge for all items that differ at most in one of the queued feature dimensions. This is why attentional guidance is most effective in single feature search, in which peaks arise only for items that completely match the queue. In conjunctive search, non-target items may become active as well, making conjunctive search less effective in this account. The influence of memory on attentional selection described thus far is purely excitatory and based on the overlap of memory items with queue features. This excitatory bias from memory explains the overall faster reaction times in the preview condition of the experiment. An additional inhibitory influence on attentional selection comes from the spatial working memory field that represent locations that have been committed to memory during the exploration phase. Their influence decreases the likelihood that attention revisits such locations. The inhibit locations may include items that match the visual search queue. The strength of inhibition is low enough, however, to be overruled by excitatory bias from the other sources. This inhibitory bias from spatial memory explains the increased efficiency in the preview condition of the experiment. The visual search process is terminated when the features at the intended location match all specified queue features. This is detected by the feature matching component, whose condition of satisfaction node activates when such a match occurs, which signals task completion. If instead one or more queued feature values are not present in the intended location, the condition of dissatisfaction node of the feature matching component becomes active and inhibits the search task node. This destabilizes the scene spatial selection field, which in turn leads to the condition of dissatisfaction itself being deactivated, so that the search task node can be reactivated and drive the attentional selection of a new location. To simulate the experiment in the DFT model, activation time courses were numerically computed using the software framework CEDAR. The visual stimuli, the timing, and the presentation procedure were the same as in the behavioral experiment, and the same number of tries was simulated. Reaction time in the model was measured as the time from initiation of the search behavior until detection of a match between the search target and currently attended item. To fit model behavior to the experimental data, we adjusted model parameters. Specifically, both visual working memory and spatial working memory of the model were tuned to achieve a capacity limit of 4 items. Note, however, that in the context of visual search, this amounts to an effective capacity limit of 3 due to the need to also retain in working memory the queue itself. Average model reaction times and slopes for each condition are shown in this figure. The slopes produced by the model are consistent with those measured in the experiment. The model reproduced both the qualitative difference between feature and conjunction searches and the quantitative effects of the search array preview. The intercepts of the reaction time curves are significantly lower than in the behavioral experiment, since the model does not capture the time needed for movement planning and execution. In conclusion, the model provides a neural process account of the visual search paradigm that includes the detection of the search queue from visual transients, its commitment to feature memory, the autonomous generation of a sequence of attentional selection decisions, and the matching of the queued feature values to feature values extracted at each attended location. The model accounts for conjunctive searches in a way that is consistent with the original notion of binding through space. I showed experimentally that allowing observers to first build a scene work in memory before performing visual search not only speeds visual search as often reported, but also increases search efficiency, an effect that has remained elusive for a long time. I explained how this effect emerged from the time and state continuous neural processes in our model. Thank you for your attention, and I would be happy to answer your further questions.